Noche del 12 de febrero, fiesta de la Candelaria, una ventana, un lucero y un ritmo mestizo y paria. Noche del 12 de febrero, fiesta de la Candelaria, una ventana, un lucero y un ritmo mestizo y paria. Mira que el niño no acabe, sal muchacha que no calle, que todo el pueblo ya sabe que te está creciendo el talle y los senos no te caben en tu vestido de calle. Y los senos no te caben en tu vestido de calle. En la Candelaria cuando llegará.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having us here. My name is Michael Hassard, and this is Ekeland. We're here to talk to you about the case of the United States versus Roman Sterlingov, which we handled in federal court in Washington, D.C. this year. Roman was sentenced in was found guilty in March of this year, and was sentenced last week to 12.5 years in prison.
And as you probably already know, Roman Sterlingov was essentially convicted for running the Bitcoin mixer, Bitcoin Fog. The government said he basically ran it from 2011 till the point when he was arrested on an airplane at LAX, and was it April 27th, 2021?
Yep, 2021. So he's been in jail since then. After they pulled him off the plane, they determined that he was a flight risk because they asserted that he had lots of internet money, and he was a sophisticated individual. Now, through the course of representing Roman, we truly believe that he's innocent of everything that he's been accused and now convicted of.
You know, the best that we can figure happened, but I'm not sure what happened, is that he did peer-to-peer transactions, or a few peer-to-peer transactions, with the people who started Bitcoin Fog back in 2011. We had a month-long trial, and at trial, basically no evidence came in of Roman actually ever operating Bitcoin Fog. There's no communications. They never got the servers. They never got the Bitcoin Fog ledger. None of the traces are direct. They don't have the private keys to addresses along their traces. There was all these issues with Chainalysis Reactor where we were denied access to their source code, their heuristics. At one point they wanted us to sign a non-compete protective order, which has never happened in the history of the federal criminal courts. And that kind of sandbagged us a little bit on experts because nobody wanted to sign it. We wouldn't even sign it. So we didn't get to look closely at their heuristics and stuff like that. A lot of stuff happened at trial that was wild. And this is the first time that we get to talk about it because we were essentially under a gag order. Our tweets would get put in the government's, motions. They tried to gag us, censor us a couple times. We battled it out. There was never an official gag order, but we could not talk about this case as was happening.
They did threaten to hold us in contempt of court if we continue to discuss this case publicly. But now that sentencing has been completed, this is the first time we're able to talk about the trial and what happened in Roman's case.
So why don't we? So this is Roman.
This is Roman. He's a good guy. He's from Russia, moved to Sweden when he was 14 years old with his mom. Grew up in Sweden. He loves computers. He battled depression for a large part of his life, and he was just starting to turn it around right when the government picked him off of a plane.
And he gets into Bitcoin in 2010.
So he had a lot of Bitcoin from the early days. And he was very concerned of going around and making peer-to-peer transactions with people at conferences just like this one. And ultimately, that was what the government used to put him in jail, right? So he was pretty validated in being afraid of that. But, he used Bitcoin Fog as a user for personal security reasons. If he's transferring somebody Bitcoin from his wallet because they're doing a peer-to-peer transaction, he'd run it through Bitcoin Fog. Now, all those transfers that he ran through Bitcoin Fog, the government said were the fees from running it.
He was getting royalty payments.
But they were not able to trace it through Bitcoin Fog, and that's because Bitcoin Fog worked.
And so essentially anybody in this room could be Roman if you're doing a peer-to-peer transaction and it ends up going down the chain to somebody that the government has decided is illicit, right? And a thing you'll face in federal court is that this is such new technology, at least in relation to the courts, right? We've got a quote here. This is from the trial transcript during what was called a Daubert hearing, which is where you're arguing over whether or not these experts should be able to come in and if their expert evidence should come in, because nobody's ever forensically tested like chain analysis reactor and stuff like that. So the judge in this case, 2.5 years in, after he's incarcerated Roman on the weight of the evidence at the Daubert hearing, says, I'm sorry, is there, I'm going to convey my ignorance on the topic. Is there an administrator for Bitcoin that maintains the blockchain? Who maintains that?
So it shows a complete misunderstanding of what Bitcoin is, how the blockchain works. And these are the people that we're leaving justice up to. This is the person who put Roman in jail pre-trial for like 3 years.
And he's the guy who decides whether or not the forensic evidence comes in relation to blockchain forensics. And this is not an isolated incident. And this is not a stupid man, right? This guy's clerk for the Supreme Court and everything like that, but there's just this ignorance in the courts. I'm hoping you see a little bit of shift now with the way the election went in the United States, but this is what you're up against if you ever get arrested for a peer-to-peer transaction.
So last week we handled Roman's sentencing. It was November 8th, and he was sentenced to 150 months in prison. That was a pretty substantial departure downward from what the government sought. The government wanted 30 years in prison. They were arguing for that. Probation came and recommended 20 years in prison. And the United States sentencing guidelines recommended a sentence of life. And these are just outrageously large sentences.
And one of the striking things to me, it was like probation's, pretrial services writes a report for the court. One of the striking things to me in their sentencing memo to the court was they couldn't name a single victim. And they haven't really identified a single specific criminal transaction going through Bitcoin fog. These are all generalized allegations based on circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, it was very, very tough to sit there and take that sentence with Roman. But 12.5 years, he's already done 3. He's going to get 15% off for good behavior, which we expect because he's not a violent person whatsoever. So he's looking at about 7 more years behind bars because of this.
And actually, very unusually, at the end of the sentencing, the judge after everything was done, went on the record saying, I think Roman Sterlingoff is a really exceptional person. And he justified his sentence, the 12.5 years, under a theory of general deterrence, which is just, okay, everybody needs to see that if you're operating this kind of, mixer like Bitcoin Fog, which was a custodial mixer, you can go to jail. And now you can see with Samurai's case, they've extended that to non-custodial context. And the laws of Wild Wild West here. It's just the fucking Wild Wild West.
This is all new stuff. So one of the issues that we had at trial was the fact that the government witnesses, whoever they brought in, were allowed, come on into trial, come say whatever you think. We even had an issue where we objected to one of their lay witnesses testifying as to expert witness facts. And the judge was like, I'm going to let this play out and see how it goes. And sure enough, the next question this witness is asked by the prosecution was an expert testimony kind of question. And we had to shut it down and everything. But this just shows that the judge was letting all these people come in for the government and testify. They paraded Ilya Lichtenstein, Larry Dean Harmon, who founded the Helix mixer and both these people cut deals with the government. They came in to testify of their use of Bitcoin Fog to conduct criminal activity.
And they actually said that it wasn't very useful for criminal activity and that there was better ways to mix, and that they stopped using it. It was, yeah. But up here too, what you see, the Daubert, that's just the hearing. You have pre-trial, where you test, you challenge the experts that the government wants to bring in. When we cross chain analysis on chain analysis reactor, basically, can you name us its error rate? No. Have you done any internal analysis as to its error rate? No. Can you name one scientific peer-reviewed paper testing to the accuracy of your software? No. Can you tell me its rate of false positives? No. Can you tell me its rate of false negatives? No.
They meant none of the factors.
But the judge let in chain analysis reactor, even though it violates what Daubert is a case, and these are called the Daubert factors. All I did was read the case and ask the questions from the case, and they were all in the negative. He said it comes in because of anecdotally, from the stories told to him by law enforcement, it's reliable. Okay, so that's obviously a big issue on appeal.
This is going to be one of our main appellate issues. This is a non-compete. You can see that it was proposed by a chain analysis lawyer, and it was completely adopted. The judge has crossed out proposed and put his initials there. this is the document that made it very, very difficult for us to bring in our own expert witnesses. You see, what we had done is we were trying to figure out who could we bring in when all the expert tracing companies are working for the government, working for law enforcement agencies around the world. So we were talking about this problem down in Bitcoin Miami in 2023. And a young man comes up to me after the our presentation, and he says, you know, this is my Alamo, dude. This is really fucked up. Like, this is a hill that I'll die on. I'm like, well, how can you help us, man? Like, for sure. He's like, look, I work with a company called CipherTrace, and we do tracing for credit card companies. MasterCard ended up buying them since we had this conversation with him. And we ended up working with one of their tracers. And
CipherTrace writes a report saying
really good report for us, very accurate, showing what really happened.
Yeah, and that chain analysis wasn't reliable, you know, the whole nine. And then, what is it, like a week or two before trial?
Just like a couple days, less than a week before trial, MasterCard informed CipherTrace and that they're pulling their support for the case. And our expert witness that we have been working with to show that chain analysis' blockchain tracing was completely inaccurate was pulled. And it was because of this non-compete.
No, it wasn't because of the non-compete. I don't know what CipherTrace.
I think it's because of the
non-compete. We still don't know what happened.
Really know.
They all lawyered up. Everybody we've been talking to got a lawyer. They went dead silent, and we had to pull our expert report like on the eve of trial. So we had to go in, and we'd lost our expert that was going to challenge the reliability of their blockchain tracing, right? So that was harsh, and we weren't getting a continuance at that point. And what the non-compete, just to go back real quick to it, what it would do is like when we had like Brian Bishop, we had a number of people from the community who stepped up, like blockchain core developers, Laurent, and they didn't want to take the risk of getting sued by chain analysis a few years down the line because they're violating this crazy non-compete that I wouldn't even advise my transactional clients to sign, more or less in a criminal case where they're denying the defendant the right to confront witnesses.
But nonetheless, these two guys stepped up and they realized what was happening in Roman, and they felt really bad, and they had the skills to come in and testify as expert witnesses on our behalf. And first we proposed Laurent Solat. He works with OXT. He's a French national. He lives in France. And because of the non-compete, and the threats in it were that if you violated the non-compete, you would have had to come back in front of this court. Because he's a French citizen, the judge was afraid that France wouldn't extradite him, because France doesn't extradite their own citizens to the United States.
So, as if he was some kind of criminal.
Yeah,
right.
They treated him like a criminal. Yeah. And so he was rejected by the judge. So we come back in the next couple of days with Brian Bishop. He's a Bitcoin core developer. This guy knows his stuff. He could definitely explain the blockchain tracing inaccuracies and the heuristics used by chain analysis. And he was also shut down by the judge because aside from his Bitcoin work, he works in biohacking, and the government made him out to sound like some kind of like he's creating Frankensteins or something. It was crazy the amount of prejudice that these people faced, being treated like a criminal and a biohacker, and being shut down on those grounds by the court.
They would look at this room and say, "You're a bunch of criminals." That's what they'd be thinking in the back of their head.
It's unbelievable. So one of the other things that we have here, though, is that CipherTrace, or MasterCard dissolved CipherTrace right after MasterCard pulled CipherTrace's support. So the company, as far as I know, is in limbo, not currently operating. That was tough for us to deal with. But now here's the transaction that the government says is the main transaction that was used to purchase a domain registration for the servers for www.bitcoinfog.com, the ClearNet website that led you to the Tornet website where Bitcoin Fog actually was.
So this is the main piece of evidence and the main trace in the case. There's no...
It's very oversimplified as well.
Yeah, this is the government's exhibit, right? So, but there's no direct connection. So this up here is actually Roman's account, right? He's got a Mt. Gox account.
He's got a KYC account.
Yeah, and he sent some Bitcoin over here to this address. The government doesn't have the private key to that address. When they arrested Roman, they arrested him with all his computers, hard drives, notes, thumb drives, everything, nothing on there from Bitcoin Fog and not this private key. And they even testified saying, it could be somebody else because we don't have that key. Bitcoin moves to another address, then goes to this Mt. Gox account number 2, which they say is Roman's, but they've got this really convoluted argument based on IP address overlap in time between different email accounts that blah, 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 blah. Then it goes down here to another account that they say is Romans, but these aren't Romans. And then it goes to Arm Exchange and goes to Liberty Reserve, and then it pays for, like Mike said, www.bitcoinfog.com.
So this Shoremint Liberty Reserve account that you see with $77.60 for Liberty Reserve dollars, Shoremint is the name of whoever did set up Bitcoin Fog. That was kind of like their moniker. They used an email, shoremint@hotmail.com. And this was the account that was used to pay for the registration of the website domain.
And the government said in their closing argument, if you find that Roman just paid for the website, you know, you can find him guilty. And we should point out, this is in 2011, and Roman's living in Sweden. And there's no evidence that any of these transactions actually went through the United States. So, I mean, that's one of the main, you know, the whole, like, Roman's never set foot in D.C. and all this stuff. There's a big issue with venue. But this is the key trace, right? Like, Chainalysis backed off. Initially in the press, they'd been saying, you know, pretending like their trace proved it was Roman. But when we challenged them, they just said, oh, no, we're not actually making any ID that Roman ran Bitcoin Fog. And they just came in for the tracing of illicit, what they call illicit funds from like Silk Road and all those sites into Bitcoin Fog, for which Roman got a forfeiture order after trial for $400 million, which he doesn't have because he never had the money, you know, kind of thing. So like even when he gets out, that judgment, that astronomical judgment just is going to keep him in debt for the rest of his life.
And despite backing down from their analysis earlier on in the case, once they were accepted by the court as an expert witness on behalf of the government, they paraded around in all the press saying that this is the case where Chainalysis reactors for the first time being accepted by federal courts as expert witness testimony. And they're using quotes from this case and the precedent that it sets, allowing Chainalysis reactor to go and sell reactor licenses to law enforcement agencies around the world. They're going to Interpol, they're going to the UK, they're going to Germany, they're going to Japan. And, you know, as far as I can tell, it's inaccurate. They don't meet any of the Dauber factors. You know, it's not reproducible. You know, if you run it a couple times, you'll get different results from what I can see. So it's just, you know, this is not the first story of somebody being trapped by Chainalysis and by the government with this kind of inaccurate digital forensics. Here we have another trace that the government says is the first deposit into Bitcoin Fog. Now you'll see if you take a close look, there's a whole bunch of different addresses here, and they're not able to say that any of them belong to Roman. You have Roman's Mt. Gox account at the very top, but once it goes in the Bitcoin blockchain, you know, they don't have the keys for any of these. They can't establish that Roman operated any of these accounts or had any of these accounts, you know. And there's 19 hops between when it leaves Roman's KYC account at the top and when there's a transaction into Bitcoin Fog at the bottom. You see that, like 19 different addresses. Part of it is being there's a co-spend with. It looks like there's a miner in there involved. Some of it is coming from an outside Insta Wallet account, which was a peer-to-peer wallet that you would use to sell and trade your Bitcoin back in the day. Like, when I look at this, I think it's pretty obvious that it's not just Roman. There's a bunch of other people and a bunch of other Bitcoin addresses that he didn't have control over before it goes into Bitcoin Fog.
And they don't have a single private key to any of those addresses.
Not one.
Not one.
Only his, because he KYC'd his at the top. He was trying to behave and go by the rules, you know. He was following it. When Mt. Gox said, we want KYC, he said, okay, here's my driver's license, you know. And nobody else at that time did that. And I think that's part of the problem, you know, because he KYC'd his account, he's the easy target for them to go after.
He's the only person they can trace back to, right? So it's the only person that they have an ID on in this long convoluted chain. So
none of these other accounts on the Bitcoin blockchain or in the Mt. Gox that we showed you earlier, none of them had KYC. So here's our previous our hopeful expert witness who had to leave when CipherTrace and support got pulled. Her name was Jonelle Still. Absolutely incredible and brilliant woman. But here she's talking about in her Daubert testimony of the significance of having 19 addresses and 10 plus hops between Roman's account and the eventual first transfer into Bitcoin Fog.
Do you see how this could be any of you in this room if you're doing a peer-to-peer transaction? You know, it's like this is just insane, and they just don't. They think this is normal, or they think this is solid forensic stuff, and it's like arguing with someone about the existence of God or something. It's maddening. But so that's why we have to educate as much as you can people and change the understanding of this stuff, because it's just this huge brick wall you face.
And this, you see all the different hops. You know, I think what really happened is that Roman had been going around to conferences in 2011 trying to encourage people to get into Bitcoin. And it was somebody who he had transacted with, maybe he transacted with it, it was his first experience with Bitcoin, but I think it's more likely that the individual sought Roman out as a source of untainted and unidentifiable Bitcoin that you could then use to develop Bitcoin fog with. So, you know, these 19 hops, no, it wasn't him, man. It wasn't him. Now, you get to the government misrepresentations and you can see the extent to which, you know, the fuckery was going on. But so this is an exhibit that the government introduced. And you can see the second bubble here. You're wondering what I can do in terms of magically having such photos or in terms of money laundering.
And they're saying this is Roman's texts on his phone.
They're saying this is, now some of you might know what this text is from a Tinder chat, right? So when this came up, Roman turned it over towards me. He's like, Mike, I never had a Tinder account. You know, use some other dating app. I'm like, well, where would this have come from? They're attributing it to you. Like, did you say this? Like, where is this in your stuff? We got to find this, like, pronto to fight it, right? And he's like, I have no idea where it is. And we got this wonderful expert forensics guy.
Jeff Fishbach.
Jeff Fishbach out of California. Shout out to Jeff. And he takes a look at it, and he immediately recognizes that the file type is for an old Palm Pilot. And he goes to Roman. He's like, Roman, do you have like a Palm Pilot with you from 1999? And he's like, I didn't have a Tinder account. I didn't have a Palm Pilot. But Jeff had done another case not too long earlier, and he had learned that like a lot of ebooks use old Palm Pilot file types. So he was like, do you have any ebooks? And Roman's like, yeah, I had a bunch of ebooks. They're on this little e-reader thing. So sure enough, we go in there and we find a book, a dating advice book by a guy named Ice White, who's a pickup artist out of London. And Roman had downloaded Ice White's book. And he was flipping through it, and he just forgot about it on his tablet, right? But what the government had done is they had gone into the book, and here's the cover of the book. Down there on the bottom left is the image that the government cut out and cut the watermark out, saying it was Ice White, and then attributing that conversation to Roman Sterlingov in court.
And this is the same expert who did that IP address analysis that said that Roman, controlled Mt. Gox number 2 and Mt. Gox number 3.
Yeah. How messed up is that, eh?
The judge let that stand.
Yeah, he did. He said he would let the jury decide on that. And then, there's a lot of stuff to appeal in this case. And then she came in and apologized to the jury, and the jury bought it. Like, she was like, oh, what did she say, Mike? I can't remember now. She was like...
She said it was her first time ever doing an IP analysis and working with the software that the FBI had given her a data dump of. And I think what happened was she was just using some kind of image search software and typed in the words money laundering and saw what came up.
And I don't think it may have been handed to her and she just didn't check it. It was really sketchy. There was a lot of stuff like that in the trial with the evidence. Like...
A lot of stuff like that. And, you know, every time we got some momentum, the prosecutors would run off to the judge, and it kind of felt like when you're a kid and you go over to a friend's house, you might break his toy or something, and they go run to their parents. That's what it was like. Every single time we got a little bit momentum, started to talk about things that were really resonating with the jury. We just got shut down, and the government worked with the judge and slowed it down. And we didn't have our tracers. It was crazy. So here's expert witness Mazars de Mazarin, Valerie Mazars de Mazarin. She was the FBI agent who did an analysis of the IP overlap analysis, as well as some of the computers in the case. She's the one who brought in this and testified to that Tinder
And that's
post.
her apology right there, you can see
That's her
at
apology,
the bottom.
yeah. You can see, and not drafted by the defendant. Yeah, that's correct. You know, if you had seen that as part of an ebook, would you have testified to this exhibit in that way? No, not at all. So the government had no corroborating evidence, no direct evidence. There was no logs, no servers, no eyewitnesses showing that Roman operated Bitcoin fog, no communications with anybody about Bitcoin fog. You know, the money didn't add up. We brought in a financial expert, J.W. Verrett, who's a wonderful professor and expert down in Washington, D.C. Shout out J.W. And, he did a comprehensive analysis, and he went in to work with Roman. He went into prison for like a week straight, working with him in the jail, going through all of his financial records to put it all together. And all those conversations that J.W. had with Roman in the prison, they were not allowed in by the court.
Yeah, he didn't like the expert, and the government got to bring in their KPMG expert. But when we say the money doesn't add up, is that if he actually had been running a Bitcoin fog, he could have up somewhere upper of like $1 billion. When they arrested him, he had about $2 million, and that's, I don't think, a lot of money for somebody who got into Bitcoin in 2010. You know, like he worked, like when he first gets into Bitcoin, it's like trading at, I think, like 32 cents for Bitcoin, and then he's still working at his day job, taking his money, putting it into Bitcoin. In 2014, it starts to go up. He quits his job and just does different stuff. But then, you know, we all know how volatile Bitcoin and crypto is, and so when he's like around 30, he's like, I need some kind of day job in case this just all falls apart, right? I can't just rely on one single thing. So he decides he's going to become a pilot. He books like an intensive in Sacramento, California, for 2 weeks, and he flies to LAX, and they arrest him right on the plane. And he's been in jail since then.
You know, and one of the things he said to me, I was like, yeah, how did it feel, like, to be in Bitcoin so early and have it just keep going up? And he was like, man, it was hilarious, because it was like the wallet that no matter how much you spent in it, it kept going up. You know, and the government didn't experience that, so they can't really relate. They think that would be illegal in and of itself somehow, you know, like, it's such a provincial mindset that we're dealing with when we're dealing with these people.
You're fighting against the normies. And, but so he was found guilty after a month trial, which really sucked. Really sucked, because like it's a little bit easier when your client has actually done something, because you can justify it to yourself. You know, yeah, well, you know, whatever. Roman didn't fucking do this. I like everyone who's worked on the case. Nobody thinks he did it, and I don't necessarily think any of this should be a crime either. But I'm just saying this guy's innocent. So right now we're at the halfway point. We file our notice of appeal, and then the appeal just will play out over the next like 1 to 3 years. And then, you know, hopefully we can get stuff vacated.
Yeah, we have a Monero donation address up here to raise money for his appeal. So any and all donations are much appreciated.
Yeah, the community was amazing, by the way. Like the community.
We wouldn't have been able to do it without you guys. Our story from our side is also pretty crazy with how we were able to fundraise for Roman's case last year.
And it started here. Like we came
This was
here
the first place.
Year, and that launch allowed us to survive. We almost got evicted from our apartments at one point. We were so broke, right? But then the community stepped up. So I want to say thank you to everybody for that, and just maybe open the floor for any questions if anybody has it, right?
Yeah. You guys have any questions?
So many questions. I mean, basically, it seems that if you've got an authoritarian government that controls and actually weaponizes the legal system against people they just don't like, right? There doesn't seem to be a lot you can do. And actually, it seems really crazy to me that a jury made of the public could even have no reasonable doubt. I mean, it seems ridiculous to me. I don't. Do they control the jury or what? I mean, I'm not American, so I don't know how the American system works exactly. It's a bit crazy.
Best as we can tell, and we just got to talk to them briefly afterwards, and just some of them. I think there was an intellectual property lawyer on the jury that kind of hijacked it. They were out for what was like 3 days.
Almost 4 days, 3.5 days, over the weekend too, so they couldn't talk about it with anybody. I think we ended on a Thursday, and they deliberated Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday afternoon we finally came in. And you know, we want to talk to the jurors afterwards about, you know, to understand, and we even asked the judge if we could, and they said no. He said we couldn't talk to the jurors to find out what really tipped them over the edge on this one. But when we're watching all the jurors come out, a lot of them were crying. They didn't want to talk. They were very upset, and I think it was pretty clear that they did not want to convict Roman. But though, there was this one guy who seemed pretty happy when he came out.
I don't know. That's a great question about the jury.
Yeah.
Juries are mysterious. You know, but
Yeah.
you know, his last plea offer was like 10. You know, if you could take guilty, so 12.5 is just a little bit higher than that, but that still sucks, man. He's in jail. I feel so horrible about it.
I just want to ask, just through your experience with this case, would you say that anyone that uses a transparent blockchain at all is really putting themselves at risk here?
Absolutely, 100%.
100%.
Okay. And then, like, I have a follow-up, like, how, like, this really seems like King George's America type stuff. Like,
We're in the Star Chamber, man.
like how can anyone really be expected to have faith in the legal system after you have a case where you just have absolutely no evidence, and then you just attack the defense, don't let them submit any evidence, don't let them submit witnesses, and then don't let them examine the software? Like, how can anyone that, even like people that aren't super into freedom, like how can anyone trust the legal system with something like this?
this is a feature, not a bug. And the United States of America incarcerates more people per capita than any nation in the world. Our prison system is a slave system. They didn't abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment. They just, moved it backstage into the prisons. I believe in the system to some extent because I'm a lawyer and I engage it, but I'm with you on that. Like, it's the conviction rate in federal criminal trials is 99%.
Over that.
Yeah, and that's not indicative of nothing is 99% accurate in this kind of area. So that, I think you just look and see that there's something systemic, and I think it's honestly, on the federal level, it's DOJ. Honestly, I think DOJ needs to go or be radically restructured or shrunk down because and we saw it in this case, there was a ton of careerism. One of the prosecutors went and got hired by Chainalysis Reactor. Another investigator sold a company they created to investigate for this case to Chainalysis Reactor 5 months after Roman's arrest. We were shut down on that line of attack too, but there's so many.
We tried to bring the prosecutor as a witness because you have a constitutional right to call your witnesses against you, and she was one of the first people to investigate this case. She then went to law school during the pendency of the investigation, ends up working at DOJ, and this case lands on her desk to prosecute. So because she was part of the investigation, we thought that, we should be allowed to cross-examine her about that investigation.
Because you always get to generally cross-examine the investigator in a case, right? She started out as an investigator, then got her law degree, became an attorney, and then became prosecutor on the case. And we said, whoa, wait a minute. She's like the investigator on the case for like 2 or 3 years before, and she's the reason it moves to D.C. It starts in like Philadelphia at like the National Security Russia desk or something like that. And she goes to Georgetown in D.C. The case goes to D.C. and she becomes a lawyer, and all of a sudden she's the prosecutor on it, right? So we're like, we want to cross-examine her on the investigative judge just shut it down.
They claim prosecutorial immunity. And now here you had a challenge. You had, a Fourth Amendment right to confront your accusers versus Sixth Amendment, Sixth Amendment right to cross your accusers against the government's prosecutorial immunity and the right for the government not to have to put on
And our position was we don't want to cross-examine her as a prosecutor. We want to cross-examine her as an investigator. Yeah. And you're denying his right to confront witnesses. Yeah, the system's fucked. It needs, 60 to 80% of federal judges worked at DOJ. And so there's any of us bring your background into anything you do, and there's this really just pro-prosecutor background you're up against in these courts. I agree with you. It is a little bit like King George's America, because one of the things we had a revolution over was the judges and the judges' rulings.
Yeah. And then just one additional, somewhat tangentially related to the case, just like all the people that are behind you, like free Roman, free Roger, free Samurai, free, not to mention Snowden and Assange, and in the attacks that are being done on legal counsel themselves for defendants. Do you guys have any opinions on that or anything you want to rip off of?
They went after us. They didn't they were publishing my tweets and their motions. They got super furious that we talked. They even, I think, pulled excerpts from our talk last year and put them in the court filings.
From our talk here in this very place.
They were it was like having a weird kind of stalker. Right, and then
we did have a stalker too.
Oh yeah, we had
somebody in the court taking photos of us on the street and threatening us on Twitter.
This case was wild.
It was crazy. This is a crazy case, man.
But
okay, thank you.
Echoing the judge, pardon my ignorance, but what was the charges that he got busted for, or
conspiracy to money laundering.
Money transmission without a license.
Money transmission is licensed, and operating an unlicensed money transmission business in the District of Columbia, where he'd never, ever in his life set foot. And their whole theory of venue, which is a big constitutional thing, you can only have venue, the trial in the place where the crime occurred, was that IRS agents in 2019 mixed some of their government Bitcoin on Bitcoin fog. Therefore, under their theory, which I think is really, really weak, and the judge avoided it when we...
Especially when they use anonymization software. They're going on with the Tor network, and they're logging into Bitcoin Fog. There's no way that whoever was operating Bitcoin Fog would have been able to tell that they were in a jurisdiction where it's not allowed.
And they sent this message that was like to like the whatever the Bitcoin fog help desk that was like, hey, I want to launder some drug money. You know, I just sold some Molly. Are you guys like a good site to like launder drug money at? And they got no response, right? But like that was them saying that Roman had knowledge of the criminal transaction.
That was their justification for venue in DC.
It's an insane theory of venue. That we're totally attacking venue, and we had filed a motion to dismiss, you know, on venue because you got to raise it right at the top or it gets waived, right? And we waited 1.5 years for a written decision from the judge.
Nothing.
And we got nothing. And finally, right before trial, we had to actually file a request for, hey, can you rule on this? And of course, he just went on the bench, didn't issue a written decision on something I think is a very, really matter of first impression, complex legal question of like the boundaries of federal jurisdiction in a computer case, and just dismissed it all without really saying anything. And we were like, okay. And then you're going to trial. I'm like, what are you going to do? But I mean, it's preserved for appeal.
Yep. We have a question from the stream. What kind of Bitcoin taint or tracing software services is open to the public, and how does it compare to what big businesses and governments use?
So that's a very good question. You know, the government and law enforcement around the world are using chain analysis. And
Chain analysis reactor.
a lot of like big corporations and banks and payment firms like MasterCard, they were using CipherTrace until MasterCard shut them down. Now you have another one called OXT, and that is where Laurent Salat came from, and he's made it. And I think that OXT is an incredible piece of software that if you want to trace stuff, maybe reach out to them. Another company that we ran into during the course of this case was Breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs a little bit less expensive. It was set up by a guy named Lauren Lance out of Singapore, and he had a problem where his Bitcoin got hacked and stolen from him. And he went to the government and they like, hey, help me get this back. And they couldn't help him. They didn't want to help him, you know. Chain analysis couldn't help him because do you know how much it costs to get chain analysis reactor?
It's like 6 figures. And if they gave it to you because they're only favoring their government law enforcement clients and
it's outrageously expensive.
Institutional investors. But chain analysis controls the market.
Yeah.
If chain analysis says that your, whatever token, whatever, is suspect, you will not get access to any exchange in the world. Unless it's, I mean, maybe I'm like being a little hyperbolic, but that's what we're seeing because we're getting calls from people, on that point. Like, and you won't get a notice from chain analysis, you'll just notice it. Like, they'll block all of your subscribers or whatever from withdrawing their money from whatever you're doing.
So to answer your question briefly, OXT and Breadcrumbs are good options for individuals.
Thank you very much for talking about all this. It sounds super scary. Given everything that you've learned during that time of dealing with this case, would you say, if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently in terms of your arguments, how you dealt with the case in court?
That's a very good question.
I would probably do more jury focus groups. I was surprised by the jury's verdict, but I'm used to it as a criminal defense lawyer. So like half of what you're doing at trials, you're trying to win an acquittal, but the odds, and the other half you're preserving stuff for appeal, which we've been successful on, particularly on the venue issue. But nothing jumps to my mind. I'm still digesting it. Like I got to go read the transcript, and it's a little bit like being through trauma. Like now, like even up here, I'm remembering stuff that happened at trial, and I was like, oh my God.
This is only the tip of the iceberg, what we've shared with you guys.
Yeah,
it goes a lot deeper than this.
I can't really think of anything on top of the head, but I'm sure when I read the transcript, I'll be like, oh my God. You know what I mean? I mean, that's why I think a lot of people don't do trials because like it's brutal, right? Like it's brutal, and it's not like you're up there being perfect. You just got to think out the seat of your pants, and that's why so many people take plea deals. Like over 90% of cases go to plea, and I've had people, well, I'm not going to say I have clients, but people will lie to get a good plea deal because they know if they go up against the system, they're completely fucked.
Now, Roman would have taken a plea, but he had nothing that the government wanted. The government's saying, hey, give us the keys to Bitcoin Fog. Give us the keys to like this Bitcoin Fog wallet that has purportedly 1,200 something Bitcoin in it. He's like, I don't have that stuff. Like, I didn't actually operate it. Like, because he had nothing, he couldn't take a plea.
Yeah.
Because he was innocent, he had to go to trial. That's the situation that he was in.
One question. What if you had more like was it a resources thing? What if you had like thrice the amount of resources you had for the?
That would have made a difference. Like, 'cause, like
Totally
jury
made a
focus
difference.
groups are really expensive. I literally almost got evicted from my apartments at one point until the community stepped up. So, and finding experts and just like flying people into DC, that was another thing. Like, I mean, he lived in Sweden, right? Like, and we're coming in from New York, and our experts are coming in from California. So, yeah.
Great talk, but I missed most of it, unfortunately, guys. But I just want to make sure. I saw super chats popping up there. Were you guys able to answer the last one? All right, that's all I want to say. Thank you. Amazing job, guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we're filing a notice of appeal. The judgment just came in like a day ago. We're filing a notice
We're
of
going to appeal this.
We're fighting this to the end.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, are you guys going to take another question, or? What about this guy who testified against him and he got only 3 years? I mean, his like partner or whatever, right? And he's got, I think, he paid off to the government like about billion of dollars, I think. You know I'm talking about. I don't remember his name.
Liechtenstein and Harmon, you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, what the hell is what's the deal with that? I mean, like, I mean, our guy doesn't have any money, and this guy had $1 billion. He gave it to the government, right? So and then he got 3 years, right? So what's the thing?
You know, we recently filed a notice of supplemental authorities on this with the court, and he just kind of washed it away. You know, we brought up the TD Bank issue where they got caught laundering money knowingly for cartels, and they don't go after any of the senior executives. They don't go after any of the middle management. They just let TD pay a $3 billion fine, and no prosecutions. You're good. A similar dynamic with Binance.
And we'd objected to Harmon and Liechtenstein coming in on the basis that, like, here these guys are coming in, they've admitted their guilt, they're coming in as felons, and they're just doing it to kind of tar Roman, and particularly Liechtenstein because he's like another Russian guy. So like there's this like really intense visual bias. Like it was, I don't think the judge should have let those guys testify because they didn't operate Bitcoin fog. They never communicated with Roman. There's no communications anywhere of Roman's where he's like talking about running Bitcoin fog. They had a password list, like his Excel spreadsheet they got from his computers of all his passwords. There's no password to Bitcoin fog. There's no administrator login. They don't have the servers. It's insane.
In fact, they went one even further than that. He did have a VPN service that he was trying to get off the ground. He was trying to make that a business. This is one of his small business ventures when he was trying to find himself in his late 20s. And he had two server blades in Romania. And one of the server blades the government brought in, and it was evidence of him operating a VPN network, but they said that it was part of Bitcoin fog.
It's got nothing on it.
There was a second server, though, that Roman hadn't put anything on yet, and it was all zeroed out. And the government testified, and they said, hey, when you wipe a server, it gets all zeros. And we were testifying, and we were saying, hey, no, that's not the case. When you buy a new server, a fresh server also shows all zeros. And they didn't even let our testimony in on that.
Yeah, they would.
Just want to interrupt real quick. Has anybody seen Amir Takki? He's what? He's buying the boots? All right, keep going, keep going. I'm going to try to find Amir.
Sounds good.
All right, on.
So, I mean, it's not really a proper question, except it seems that America is nothing but a tyrannical state right now. And so why isn't there a mass exodus of Americans from America right now?
I think because we like to overthrow our government, or at least that's our founding
philosophy. There's a big exodus out of California and New York and places that have more restrictive regimes, and they're moving to places like Florida and Texas. Go Texas, baby.
Yeah.
And Wyoming. I like Wyoming.
It may reach that point, but for the moment we fight. Maybe it just gets so insane that you're just going to get wiped out. But for the moment we fight.
I just ran away from the UK.
Social media, they're arresting people for social media there. That is absolutely
outrageous.
Insane. I don't want to go to the UK. I'm afraid that I'll get popped for my Twitter feed.
It's crazy.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Sunita.
And thank you, Dr. Cabanas.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Dr. Cabanas is there with us through the whole trial.
Yeah.
Last but most certainly not least, Amir Takki. Thank you, Amir, for making it out here, man.
Yeah, so Amir is a legend. He created the BIP process in Bitcoin in a time when changes were made very easily by Gavin Andreessen and a bunch of other guys. And then he created the first alternative client for Bitcoin Core.
I can just give my own.
Okay, you're going to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
I'm useless, okay.
We lost the clickers.
Okay, that's fine. No, sorry, I don't want to. Yeah. I mean, I was about to say when I saw the Mac, I don't use non-free software, but luckily I'm using Linux. So, and I was wondering where everybody is, but it turns out everybody's here, so that's great. Yeah, free Roman Storm and Roman Sterlingov and free Samurai, free Roger Ver, and the best news: Ross Ulbricht is going to be free. Silk Road is the best thing that happened in crypto. Bring back Silk Road. Is this one? This one's better. I'm going to use this one. Okay. Yeah, just quickly about myself. I'm a free software developer for 20 years. I was a core Bitcoin developer from 2010 to 2015. I am 10 years plus on privacy technology and made the first coin join and stealth addresses on Bitcoin, the first implementations. I wrote the BIP1, the first, alternative Bitcoin implementation, the first UK Bitcoin exchange. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about DarkFi, which I tell to people is in the same way Monero is the anonymous version of Bitcoin, we're making the anonymous version of Ethereum. So it's an L1 for anonymous smart contracts. I also want to talk about the app that we're building. So what's the product that users are going to interact with and how does that work? So let's begin by talking about the name. Where does the name DarkFi come from? So in 2013, a group of us founded a project called Dark Wallet, and there was Cody Wilson, who's the inventor of 3D printed gun, Vitalik, a group of Spanish hackers. So we founded the Dark Wallet, and you can go on YouTube and you can see the initial announcement video, which is an important piece of Bitcoin history. But at the time, the Bitcoin Foundation, they were attempting a hostile takeover of Bitcoin. It was a bunch of business interests who they were basically like, Bitcoin is a payments technology. It's not about building an alternative economic paradigm, cypherpunk economics. It's merely, a tool for consumers. And these crazy crypto anarchists have invented this, new product, consumer product, this new plaything. And if only we can pry it out of their hands, we can get it adopted by the mainstream, and it can go on to change the world. And the reason why we made the Dark Wallet, and you can see this in the video, it lays out what was happening at the time, was to draw a line in the sand, and it was to say that either you are for the principles of freedom or you are for the Bitcoin Foundation and their co-option of the movement. And we started something that ended up in their total destruction, and the end result of that is the Bitcoin maximalism. So I'm sorry that I created that thing, but it was born out of that movement. That was my fault because I went to Syria and I left it to the cringy technocrats like Peter Todd and those CIA agents, so. I mean, I don't want to take a detour, but this is real. Like, I was sending to people the emails that were leaked of Peter Todd, all the quotes where he's collaborating with a secret agent, and people did not believe me. But then the HBO documentary came out, and it was all laid bare in the documentary. And then people were like, oh, Peter Todd's an agent. And I was like, yeah, I was telling you for ages. It's like literally, and people are like, oh. And that's the mentality of people who are like, oh, it's in a mainstream documentary, I believe it now. Versus like, here's all the evidence. including like all the quotes and everything. Like, oh, I don't know. But anyway, so anyway, I was talking about the name of dark wallet. So there was the director of the FBI. He gave a speech, and he said that the mass adoption of cryptography, if a lot of people start using cryptography, it threatens to create dark zones in the internet where law enforcement cannot penetrate, and that this was a big problem for law enforcement. He called it the going dark problem. He said, unfortunately, the law has not kept pace with technology, and this disconnect has created a public safety problem, which we call the going dark problem. So we adopted that. We said, yes, we affirm this vision. He is correct in what he's saying, and we want that. That's the future we want. So, you know, so that's where the dark wallet name came from. It means, you know, like, let's go dark. Let's, you know, rewild the internet with cryptography, you know, which is basically, you know, let's create this dark forest. The forest, you know, it's like we are defenders of freedom, of, you know, the right to bear and use cryptography, which is the means through how we are able to, you know, mobilize and create free society. But also this forest, which we help grow, it also provides protection to us cyber guerrillas, to our movements in the internet. And so, you know, basically, you know, cypherpunk, like people talk about cypherpunk, and, you know, we can think about that, like here are the three main principles of cypherpunk, which is, you know, strong anonymity, which strong anonymity does not mean like, oh, you know, it's somewhat private. No. Your application is either anonymous or it's not. There is no gray zone. So whenever people go, you know, there's a trade-off space. No, there is strong anonymity, and that's it. We have to be extremists in this. Secondly, censorship resistance. Absolute 100% free speech. No matter what I want to say, you know, I'm going to say it, and you can't stop me. And people go, oh, that's kind of dangerous. So what? You know, that's your problem. We're going to do it either way. Thirdly, sovereignty. That means our infrastructure, you know, it's peer-to-peer, it's decentralized. They can't shut it down. Have a problem, officer? You know, tough. Yeah, you deal with it. So why do we need this dark forest? Why do we need these cypherpunk values? Well, let's imagine a scenario. Let's imagine an authoritarian government comes into power. You know, maybe it already has in your country, and they start oppressing you. They start putting your friends in jail, and you need to mobilize with your community to create a parallel free society. What do you need to do? First of all, you need to be able to communicate, to get the word out, to spread the message. That's why we need anonymous communication platforms. We need anonymous messengers. You know, then you need to be able to form organizations on chain, you know, or anonymous, completely anonymous organizations that can't be shut down. And you know, you want to raise a treasury into that organization, which is managed by your community. And you know, then, you know, inside of that, you have some kind of governance, and you want to allocate resources, you know, to projects, to things you do. And you want to do this all completely anonymous, all the, you know, participants completely anonymous, all the actions of the organization completely anonymous. And then, you know, you want to use like task managers and whatever, you know, coordination software, all again completely anonymous, to coordinate work and say what are the tasks we need to do to achieve our objectives. And then, you know, you pay people a salary, you pay them anonymously, and now they have the cash, and they need to be able to cash that out. They need to be able to do OTC, to trade it, to pay for things in their life. Again, all completely anonymous. And in that way, you've basically created the foundation for a freedom movement, so that you can mobilize and you can change things. And this is what DarkFi is aiming to achieve. This is what we have built, and we're putting in place this infrastructure. So, you know, we're not in the same. People say, you know, like I get this often. They're like, oh, you know, aren't you going to scare away people? You know, like most people, they just, you know, they want the status quo. Bullshit. Like, they're not in the same. We are not in the same situation as 10 years ago. Like now, it's widespread that people are like, oh, they're lying to us. We cannot trust the government. We cannot trust the elites. We have to build our own network, our own people power. And then the difference compared to even 2 years ago, there was this like prevailing, you know, pessimism where we were like, you know, the NSA spying on us is absolutely, you know, screwed. There's nothing we can do. We're powerless. Now that's changed completely. Now people are like, oh, we can take back the power. That they are losing their grip on power. They're losing control of the narrative. So we have a window of opportunity. And, you know, in 2012, 2013, you know, a load of us, I don't know if Pavel Luptak's here, but, you know, oh, there he is. Yeah, we were sitting around and going, oh, the revolution, it's imminent, you know, it's going to happen, you know, and we got complacent. And then what happened is, you know, all the other guys came in, and those, you know, money guys and corrupt people, they were like, oh, we're going to get wealth, we're going to get powerful, we're going to become strong. And we were like, oh, you know, we just need to like help it along, but it's already going to happen. Big mistake, you know. So now we've learned from that experience, and we have to step up. And I see here in this conference incredible stuff. I see different projects building the pieces of the Agorist network. You know, you've got the freedom cells. You know, they're going to the communities, they're going to the small producers, and they're getting them, you know, to link up with each other to form their own sovereign, you know, economic communities. You've got, you know, Cake Wallet, which is allowing people to like come into Monero and come out of Monero so that Monero has liquidity. You've got No Ones, which is, you know, they're building the network of people trading, so we don't need to rely on exchanges. You know, loads of stuff happening here. You know, Anarcho Polko, etc. These are all little pieces of the bigger Agorist, you know, revolution that we're making. And, you know, we're trying to do our small part as well to give the tools that people need. And, you know, in the next 5 years or so, there's going to be an event of major macroeconomic or political significance, and we cannot allow that to pass us by. We have to be ready that when the window of opportunity shows itself, we can mobilize and we can take that opportunity, we can make use of it. And you know, the states are sending devs to jail for writing anonymous software, and they're doing that to make us afraid. But it's actually the opposite, because, you know, if you come up to me, if, for example, we're chatting and you say something to me benign, and I respond like, and I go, you know, I get really aggressive, and you're like, whoa, where did that come from? That's like completely an unnecessary response. That's showing that I'm weak, that I'm vulnerable. And when they are responding in that way to devs, putting devs in jail for writing anonymous software, they are taking their mask off and they are showing where they're vulnerable. And that action, which is meant to frighten us into compliance, it has the opposite. It's exactly where we need to push. We need to push harder because they are afraid, and we are not going to let up. And, you know, people always say to us, you know, oh, you know, what about this project? What about that project? And, you know, I'd say that DarkFi does not have any competition at all, because, you know, you get these privacy projects and they go, you know, join our Discord, check out our Google Docs. They are putting devs in jail for writing on the internet. And if you are using Discord, it means you are not afraid. And if you're not afraid, it probably means you're not doing anything important. I don't think any of these VC cuck projects are going to write the software that people need to escape tyranny. I mean, it's very indicative that our industry, I mean, Monero, I'm not counting Monero here. This is a really ideological principled community, and that's why I'm a Monero fan. But I was just in DevCon, which is literally 40,000 people. It's a massive conference. It's like unimaginable scale. Like everywhere you go in the city, there's crypto bros, and it's literally an industry where there has been hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars or more poured into projects. And despite that, we still do not have the software that people need. They're literally in England putting people in jail for wrong speak. They literally just put a guy in jail for 3 years for holding up a sign that say BlackRock, the politicians, they're corrupt. He went to jail for 3 years and he died in jail. And that's not one guy. They're doing that to loads of people. Because people are suffering, and they're speaking up about what's happening to them, and the governments are just responding by putting people in jail. And it's like we are meant to be, standing by the resistance, providing with them with the backup, and yet we have not been able to deliver. That's why projects are going, join our Discord, check out our Google Docs, or everybody, all the crypto communities on Twitter. It's such a dead end. Why are we on a centralized doxed platform? It's so ridiculous, and it's the reason. And there are, and if you really want to know, there's literally projects which have 20x, 100x, 200x the budget that DarkFi has, and yet they have not even been able to accomplish 20% or 10% of what we have done. So it's really showing you how the entire industry is operating, because the central bank, it prints money and it gives it to these VC firms, and these VC firms, to get that money, they have to be friends, they have to be part of that system, and then the crypto founders, the people making the projects, they kind of go to these VCs and they go, oh, please, Mr. VC, and they hand out their bowl, and in return they're giving their tokens, their labor, their life soul, and these VCs, they have all this liquidity that's stolen money from working people anyway, and they're like, oh yeah, have some pennies, have some crumbs from the master's table. And then of course, projects are they have to get the VC's favor, they have to be a certain way, and that's why they end up compromising on their values. Open Bazaar, after Ross was sent to jail, I started thinking, I was like, okay, what is the Silk Road? And I realized we can build the Silk Road P2P. There's actually a few simple components, and there was a hackathon, and they were offering $10,000 for first prize. So I said to my friend, I was like, look, we can hack together this thing, and we can get the first prize. And what we did is we built a P2P Silk Road, and we launched that, and that was it took the community by storm, and this was 2013, and they even made this is I don't want to get too deep into Bitcoin history, but there was all the Reddit normies, they made a thread which was a petition to get me to rename the software from dark market, because that would scare away big banks and investors. Everyone in Bitcoin's now a cool cypherpunk. But in 2013, in 2010, 2011, it was hardcore, there was a mantra. It was mantras are powerful. And in 2010, 2011, I came into this community and everybody was going, oh, the government's corrupt. We need to end the Fed. That was the main goal. Everyone was we need to end the Fed. Gold, like that. But then, 2012, 2013, Bitcoin started to pick up a little bit more. And then suddenly all these normies started to come in, and they didn't get Bitcoin. And I'd go to a conference, and there'd be guys come up to me in in a suit, a guy, and goes, oh, Amir, patronizing, go, Amir, you know, you're an expert on writing software, but I'm an expert on marketing. And let me tell you how it's done. And then he'd go on about his like brain dead ideas. You know, oh, we need to make it non-threatening. You know, we need to get big banks on board. And then everybody was kind of like, oh, the Bitcoin Foundation. And so we were like kind of, we managed to re-rally, you know, the cypherpunks against that, to like destroy the Bitcoin Foundation. We were successful in that, but anyway, the reason why, so I was talking about Open Bazaar, which, you know, some other guys came, they forked dark market, they changed, you know, they changed the license from GPL to a CUC license, and then they renamed it to Open Bazaar. And then the first thing they went is to A16Z, which is like, A16Z is like the worst VC firm, you know, they're like the biggest. And anyway, A16Z, so we developed this, you know, software that was like modeled off of Silk Road, and it was meant to like empower the community. And then I guess they also saw, those guys, that potential of the software. But then they went about it the wrong approach, which was like, you know, to get powerful, we need the help of the powerful. And so they went to A16Z, and A16Z started to tell them, make mandates about how they need to do the project. And so one of the things, the first things they said is, you need to implement blacklist technology. And so to blacklist bad uses of the software. And they forgot who is their primary market of that software, you know? So, you know, you know, the VCs, you know, the crypto industry, it's a lot of money, etc. But so yeah, so then people go. So then when I start also talking about DarkFi and also, you know, I guess Monero, you know, people always go, you know, what about criminals? You know, what about pedophiles? And you know, there's so much I can say on this, but you know. First thing is that, you know, people are obsessed. Like, people are watching movies about gangsters, you know, about criminals, about lawbreakers. And it's almost like people sympathize with the criminals because there is a prevalent sense that we are under foreign occupation by a colonizer. And that foreign occupation has become so dubious and has lost all sense of moral superiority that in some ways the criminal actually ends up being the kindred soul. But you know, the real thing here is that you know, the rich and the powerful and the oppressor and the oppressed and the poor and the weak they cannot operate on the same level. And so when they invent a label of criminal and they judge us by this label that they have invented, we are, you know, playing the game by the rules that they set. And we can't play the rule. We have to play by our own rules. So, like, you know, if we really want to ask who's the true criminal, they literally killed 2 million people in the Middle East for nothing. 2 million people. Like, what is completely pointless? So who's the real criminal? The fucking pedophiles in the government, not the people who are trying to claim their freedom back. And, you know, we also have to differentiate ourselves from the criminal, because we are not criminals. We are forest rebels. Because we are fighting for a cause, and we have a philosophy, and we have a morality, and you know, the dark forest is our shield, and you know, the split is coming, the DarkFi RegFi split, and I'm going to explain about this. You know, why we're going to win, especially since you cannot stop a technology whose time has come. So there are two types of system, you know, anti-fragile systems. When they come under attack, when you shake them, you know, they become stronger. They like reinforce themselves against attack. Whereas fragile systems, when you shake them, they're vulnerable, they fall apart. So think about, for example, some VC cuck projects, and there is a threat against crypto, and the first thing, the VCs will get scared because they're dealing with huge amounts of money. They're beholden to their masters, in the US, financial system, and the first thing they're going to do is they're going to deallocate risk away from, edgy parts of crypto, or even crypto as a whole. So as soon as crypto comes under attack, which if crypto is doing anything useful, it will come under attack, because what is the purpose of cryptocurrency? The purpose of cryptocurrency is, I was on a call, I was on a presenting Stanford School of Law, and there was a CFTC regulator, and he which is head of one of the financial bodies in the US, and he started talking about antiques and collectibles, little trinkets, etc. And he said that cryptocurrency has this choice, and even cryptocurrency can go the way of these like collectibles. This is like the shit like GameFi, social media-fi, shit that does not challenge the status quo, stuff that they will allow to exist because it changes nothing. Whereas we've got like private cyber money issued by online networks that travel at the speed of light, which is versus their fiat networks that travel at the speed of law. So the anti-fragile system of crypto, that's where the real use case is, and that's where unlock the true potential. We have not tapped into it yet, but we are. But like what's happening here, we're mobilizing, we're getting to that point. We have to just work, and we have to be diligent. We have to organize. As soon as an anti-fragile system comes under attack, it becomes stronger. It reinforces why you need that thing. And so surveillance and anonymity are in a feedback loop. So the more the anonymity gets stronger, the less power that governments have, the more that they have to resort to surveillance apparatus to increase the amount of surveillance, which validates why anonymity exists. And so they're in this like cyclic feedback loop. And you see that happening now, where people are becoming more cognizant of why they need anonymous software, compared to 10 years ago, where people were oblivious to NSA mass surveillance. And so you have this crackdown, and then rising political consciousness, because people become they become politicized. They start to wake up, and then this causes people to move. So this essay, you can find it on YouTube if you search Lunapunk Rekt, R-E-K-T, Lunapunk and the Dark Side of the Cycle. It's a very good 8-minute video essay. And so another thing is, crypto, as crypto is forced underground, it's like, that's where its true agorist nature starts to become unleashed. It's like potential starts to become realized. So, we've got cryptography, and I study a lot of math, and when I'm studying math, I'm like going through these textbooks, and I'm reading, and I see. I see some mathematical truth, and I go, oh, that's, very interesting. And, you start to, learn all these different mathematical truths, and then you see all these properties, and you kind of go and you put them together, and that's how we construct cryptographic schemas. So cryptography is making use of, Mother Nature's, mathematics, the language of nature, proverbially, as people say. So there's this like fundamental truth of the cosmos, fundamental mathematical reality, which is used to essentially when we're doing cryptography, we're casting a spell. And, the state, we're casting a spell to protect society, and the state cannot do anything to defeat that. It's like impossible, because it's like man-made, laws by the state, by a corrupt system versus Mother Nature. And nothing can defeat Mother Nature. And if there is anything that is called magic that exists in the real world, that is magic. Literally summoning the power of Mother Nature to aid us in our quest to protect us. Yeah, so, I show this image because, I watch a lot of sci-fi, and, in the 90s, even modern sci-fi, it shows these amazing, UIs of the future. And yet, for some reason, expectation versus reality, we have all these apps on our phone, like delivery apps, that are Electron slop, JavaScript rubbish. They're laggy. You open them, they've got some corporate Memphis, Globo Homo, dancing people, colorful people. It's like we literally live in a Soviet dystopia, and they're presenting us as colorful image of the president. It's literally what they did in the Soviet Union, where people were watching the TV and they were like, well, that's obviously a lie, because I can see around me that the system's falling apart. But then people were like, well, I don't know what else there is. So they just kept on living their life. And we've kind of become mentally enclosed in some sense, where, our imagination has become limited by these big corporations. And, in the 90s, we were promised I future. And I was like, wow, that looks so cool. I can't wait to live in the future. But instead what we got was I read an article recently. It said that Gen Z cannot use a file system. Gen Z cannot use a printer. And the reason why that is because there is an economic model at play here, which is that Silicon Valley, they produce software. And, I was talking about the VC hype cycle earlier. How does it work, you get together a group of guys and you slap together a UI, and there's no tech underneath, there's nothing, there's no fundamentals, and you go to some VCs and you go, oh yeah, this is going to be big, it's going to be massive, give me some money. And then the VC gives you seed money, and then you hire loads of staff, HR, marketers, you're like, oh yeah, the tech, once we get big, we'll work on that, but let's do the pump first, and so they end up building these massive organizations which look impressive to the VCs, and they're like, oh yeah, look, and they're pushing the product to try and get user acquisition, because the more users they get, the more the VC, they have a checklist. They're like, oh yeah, good UI UX and lots of users, and it's all fake. It's completely fake, because the users, for example, you've given them incentives. It's not real growth. The UI, it's like a fake UI. It's maybe on the back end it's centralized. It's true for a lot of Ethereum L2s. A lot of Ethereum L2s, they're a multi-sig. And it's just a centralized server. And so, they have all that hype. And so, there's this groupthink, because they're trying to get user acquisition, because they want to appear big. It's a simulacrum of a software that provides utility that actually has real community. Instead it's oh yeah, look, we've got all these people, but the people are all paid, etc. And so their mentality is okay, we need to make this software which gets loads of normies on board, and they kind of look down on people. They're like, oh, most people are stupid, so they're like, oh, we need to get as many low IQ sheep cattle people into our system as possible, so that we can tax each person a little bit. And so then that's why they create these UIs which they're just ugly, and they're laggy, and they're inefficient. And they're not built for people to do real work, for people to, construct the new paradigm. And so that's why, for example, we have all these apps on our phone where you open it, and you've all seen the meme about you go to a website to order something, and you get all these pop-ups, and you're like, no, close, and it's like, oh, do you want to add your email? And you're like, no, close. And then you search something, and then it auto-completed and it goes somewhere else, and you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, and then you search it, and then you click it, but it's gone down the page, because it's loaded some blog, some spammy stuff, oh, join our socials, that's the reality. What happened to the future, the cool UIs in the sci-fi? I want to live in that, not this rubbish. Sorry, I don't know how deep I want to get into this, but Linux. So basically, Stallman led this revolution against the co-option of the PC industry. I could talk about this outside another time, wherever. But at the time, Linux was something really innovative, where people were like, whoa, this thing allows me to do stuff that I cannot do anywhere else. I cannot do with any other operating system. And then as the movement started to get big, just like what happened in crypto, a bunch of people came along and said, oh, we need to get mainstream mass adoption. We need to get the big guys on board. Stallman, you're talking about freedom, you're talking about values. That's a very scary thing. And so that's why they created open source. Open source was a way of cutting Stallman out and focusing just on the business case of free software, which was it's cheaper, it's more secure, but they forgot the principles of freedom, of building a new paradigm. And so they lost the soul of what free software was about. Then in 2000s, we peaked with Ubuntu, and people were like, oh yeah, it's usable. But what happened with the Linux movement was that we made this gold standard of what is the best, and the best is Microsoft Windows. And so we need to be like Microsoft Windows, but better, but more ahead. And so what happened is that Linux ended up becoming the shitty alternative, the free alternative, and constantly was playing catch up to Windows. It was always Windows is the gold standard and we're one step behind. Whatever Windows implements, we implement, we follow up. And so we lost something in the process. And so then, Macs came and passed us by, and then mobile came and passed us by, and we missed those two opportunities, massive shifts in the computing industry, and Linux fell really behind. But then with Linux, there was a dawning realization. This has happened really recently. If some of you know Systemd, the pushback against that, the movement towards minimal Linuxes, etc. And this is really important, this realization, because the new generation around Linux has realized something fundamental. And this is what we have to realize in crypto if we want to really realize crypto's fundamentals, which is that Linux is not, a Silicon Valley proprietary product whose aim is about growth of user acquisition, of trying to give a dumbed down software, so they can acquire as many normies as possible to tax them, Linux is about something different, something more powerful. It's about giving us the tools that we can use to build infrastructure, so we can become powerful, so we can become economically strong. It's about building networks. And this is fundamentally what cryptocurrency is about. Cryptocurrency is not some app. It's not something about trying to get as many normies as possible. It's about how do we organize outside of the state our own agorist networks, and what are the tools and infrastructure that we need. And so that's why we need to start thinking about software in that way. When you look at something like, I don't know, Twitter or something, it uses all these tricks to try and hook you into the application, but it's not built for you to be efficient at working. For example, if you make a post and you get a whole bunch of people reply, and you go into notifications, you try to reply to people, every so often it scrolls you back up to the top so you can see more notifications. So it doesn't allow you to respond to everyone efficiently. It's by design they've crippled the utility of the application to make it more addictive. So it's not empowering you as a user. And the cryptocurrency has fallen into this trap. And that's because it's not conscious of these economic forces at play in the wider industry. So this is why, as DarkFi, we're trying to think of we're trying to conceptualize a new paradigm for UI. And we're trying to bring back that futuristic sci-fi vision that we were promised, but we never got. So in the Tornado Cash case, how they put the guy in jail was for three things. The first thing was that they had access to all of their internal Signal chats. And so, even though Signal has this cryptography, they still had access to their internal groups. And they were able to say, oh, you're doing this activity and, you're doing this activity and therefore you're like the CTO, you're like the CEO. So even if you've got cryptography, it's not going to protect you if you have an identity. So as a DarkFi, we recognized this liability that we had. And we were like, and the default strategy is that projects run away from their community. They run away to more and more exclusive groups. And, there are things, they say we live in free speech. We do not live in free speech. There are things that I, as a founder of a crypto project, cannot say. If I say those things, I go to jail. So we wanted a way that we could communicate openly with our community without having to run away and allow our community to be engaged. And so that's why we made, it's the world's only anonymous peer-to-peer, the world's most strongest anonymous chat, because there is no linkability between messages. All of the messages are completely unlinkable. So you can't, if I say a message there and they go later oh, you said that, I go, well, it's not me, it could be anybody. Anybody can take that nickname, And so you might go, and then we have a whole bunch of techniques to allow, for example, to stop against spam on the network layer. We use rate limit nullifiers. So this is the only messenger I know where the messages are unlinkable. All the messengers, you create some key pair, you create some identity, and all your messaging is like that. In this messenger, you can change your nickname at any time to anything. So nobody knows, he said this message, then he said this message. And so, second thing in the Tor, and also as we mentioned, the messenger also works over Tor, it works over NIM, so it's got anonymity on the network layer as well, so it's fully protected. So, what's that say? No. Yeah. So the second thing with the Tornado Cash case, how did they get them? They had a DAO. They had an on-chain, DAO. And all the token holders were completely visible. So they were able to say, oh, you've got this amount of tokens, you've got this amount of tokens, you're like a board member, and so they're able to put them in jail. They go, oh, the DAO's like a company operating on chain. So, we also did, so a lot of people don't know this, but Assange's freedom was basically bankrolled by the crypto community with Assange DAO. Assange DAO raised 55 million for Assange. And the DAO was meant to be a DAO to liberate Assange, by all means necessary. But when the DAO was created, we had this problem, which was that everybody in the DAO was completely doxxed. And this is like a DAO for like a high stakes political prisoner. And if you're just some random dude, one day the police are going to come to you and say, oh, you voted in the DAO, for this activity, for Assange, and, they oppress you. Nobody's going to, these guys here, we know who they are, but maybe nobody's going to talk about you, you just disappear. So it just killed the activity in the DAO. Nobody wanted to operate in a transparent DAO. The other thing with the DAO is that the DAO was meant to participate in a public auction. But because the treasury of the DAO was public, it broke the game theory of the auction. So because of that, we made the world's first, and it's the only anonymous DAO in existence. It's a full on-chain DAO, token-weighted voting. You can manage a treasury. You can do everything. You can do any function call with this DAO. There's no other product that exists like that. And you know, in 2020, 2021, you know, there was a lot of excitement around DAOs. People in the Ethereum community were talking about squad wealth. And that vision of the crypto future, it was like going, oh, DAOs, you know, they allow people to like no longer have to use corporations and companies. People can form on-chain organizations and like mobilize to change things. But that vision didn't really take off, and instead what took over was like DeFi, degen, kind of shitcoiner nihilism. And I think the reason why that vision didn't take hold was because if your DAO is existing to change something, to change something politically, you know, to have an effect, but the DAO is doxed, then you know, people are going to be oppressed. So a crucial ingredient to have DAOs is to have anonymity of the DAO. And when I say anonymity, I mean that the treasury is hidden, the members are hidden, the activity is hidden, the votes are hidden, everything is completely anonymous. That's the second point. The third point about the Tornado Cash case was that they were running infrastructure. So they said, oh, you know, you're running this infrastructure, go to jail. You know, you say you're just a dev, but you're actually operating infrastructure. So as DarkFi, you know, we've done everything in our power to minimize infrastructure that we're running as possible. So for example, you know, I don't see it here, but we have a decentralized task manager. So the reason why that exists is anonymous P2P decentralized task manager, so we don't have to use GitHub issues. So we don't have persistent identity of who's doing what, of the conversations around the software. So we built that deliberately. So, and you know, I've put some images here of some of the parts of the software. There's the blockchain running the consensus, the network explorer, you can see the nodes that are being viewed, a tool for doing on-chain swaps, ZK compiler, a wallet, etc. So, you know, so for example, I was talking about the anonymous chat here. So people often say to me, they go like, oh, you know, how can people coordinate online if they're anonymous? The thing is that we have been so brainwashed by the transparent paradigm. You know, blue check mark, you know, cool profile picture on Twitter, that we cannot imagine another way of doing things on the internet. That like, we're like, you know, people can't understand, like, how can we organize without having to use real names, without having to use KYC? But the thing is that the internet was built just of pseudonymous people. Like in the 90s, you'd just join an IRC channel and you'd go like, oh, I have this problem, and some dude would answer you and you'd start submitting patches. Nobody cared about your real name. That was the default in the 90s. This is like a modern new thing where we have to use real names, where we have to be doxed and transparent online. That's a psyop, and we need to escape that. In the same way that those people in the Soviet Union were like mentally enclosed. Their imagination was limited by the system that had been built up around them. You know, the true internet native way is using pseudonyms, forming affinity groups online with trust networks. And it turns out that it works really well. It forces people to have proper defense in depth. You know, you see some dude saying something online, you don't just believe what he's saying. You're like, let me think critically. That's why, and you know, like the communities, they're like immune to like e-celeb nonsense, you know, to glowy psyops. That's why no culture comes out of Reddit. The memes that come out of Reddit are cringe, because all think upvote. Where does the internet culture actually originate from? Anonymous communities. So come home, cypherpunk. And you know, So I talked a bit about DarkFi on the infrastructure level, but I also want to talk about, like, you know, so there's this like tendency in cryptocurrency where Ethereum did it this way, and Ethereum is very successful. And because Ethereum did it this way, this is the way that you should do things. And one of those things is this whole thing of hosted website front ends with MetaMask to interact with them, which is really crappy. And you know, when we created Dark Wallet in 2013, that was the very first web wallet in crypto. And at the time, Vitalik was like part of the project, but he later left after a year to found Ethereum, from which MetaMask was born. And at the time, what we imagined was that people would be shopping on the internet, and they'd be shopping, and they'd see a product they want, and they'd go, oh yeah, let's buy that. And they'd click, and their web wallet would open, and they'd click confirm, and it would just be bought. And so that's where that web wallet paradigm originated from. But somehow along the way, it turned into this thing of like, oh, you know, you need like the devs, they make a website front end. But it's just a very crappy paradigm because, you know, it's insecure. Like the web is just like an insecure paradigm. You know, it's non-portable. You can't use it on the phone. You have to use the desktop. It's buggy. It's ugly. And most of all, it introduces significant liability for developers because now you need to host a front end. If your front end goes offline, you're screwed. So I don't know why there wasn't a platform created for applications. If you look at the original wallets on Ethereum, like Mist Wallet, that's what was being envisioned at the time, but they took a shortcut and they didn't end up making that. So with DarkFi, that's why we're creating our own app. Our own app that is built from the ground up with strong anonymity, where people can, inside of the app, you know, download, you know, different dApps. They're integrated in this single interface, and you don't need to rely on the web, which is a source of failure. So, you know, so yeah, we have a dev meet every Monday. So I'll just, you know, to conclude here, you know, they call us criminals, but they are the true criminals. And in the end, history will be the final judge of our actions, and history will absolve us. Anonymity, it's not, you know, anonymity is something that expands the space of freedom, as Satoshi said. You know, it's offensive, it's hard. You know, privacy is not normie. Privacy is exceptional, it's special. It's something that we strive for. And the dark, you know, that's like the dark forest, the internet rewilded with cryptography. And we are forest rebels. The DarkFi RegFi split, it's coming. It's an inevitability, you know. Crypto is literally magic. We are casting spells. That's what people mean when they say violence cannot solve math problems. There's nothing that violence can do to defeat math. So we are superior in this fight. We are the winners. And crypto regulation is an open and official provocation against liberty and sovereignty. All who advocate for it are domestic enemies of the people and must be absolutely opposed. The right of the people to keep and deploy cryptography shall not be infringed. There's a struggle between the previously creative but now outworn sensate order and the new emerging creative idealistic forces in all fields of social and cultural life. Every aspect of Western social life is in crisis. Its body and mind are ill. We are between two epochs, the dying sensate culture of a magnificent yesterday and the coming culture of a creative, idealistic tomorrow. The rays of sun still illuminate the glory of the passing epoch, but the light is fading. And in the deepening shadows, it becomes more and more difficult to see clearly in the confusion of twilight. The night of the transitory period stands before us with its nightmares, shadows, and horrors. Beyond it, the dawn of a great culture is waiting to greet the people of the future. The moon illuminates our path through the coming long night. Let there be dark.